This database stores the DNA of 31,000 New Yorkers. Is it legal? A database used by the New York Police Department violates state law and the Constitution, the Legal Aid Society contends in a lawsuit. 3 years ago, Shakira Leslie was returning home from a cousin's birthday party in the Bronx when officers pulled over her friend's car for a traffic infraction. After she got out the back seat, the police searched her and found nothing illegal. But when a gun was found in another passenger's bag, everyone in the car was arrested, charged with weapon possession, and taken to the precinct. There, Miss Leslie waited for more than 12 hours without getting anything to eat or drink, she said, until officers brought her into an interrogation room and gave her a cup of water. Eventually, she was released, and the charge against her was dropped. But weeks later, Miss Leslie learned new details about the night of her arrest that rattled her. The police had taken the cup and collected her DNA from it without asking. Officials later tested it and used it to determine that she had not handled the gun. I was shocked, upset. I just felt violated, said Miss Leslie, 26, hairstylist. I completely lost trust for the NYPD. Her DNA was entered into a city database that contains tens of thousands of profiles, and her lawyers say it remained there even though that night 3 years ago is the only time she's ever been arrested. Miss Leslie is a plaintiff in a federal class action lawsuit filed Monday by Legal Aid Society, which accuses the city of operating an illegal and unregulated DNA base in violation of state law and constitutional protections against unreasonable searches. The suit calls for DNA profiles that lawyers argue were gathered unlawfully to be expunged and for the database to be shut down entirely. Thousands of New Yorkers, most of whom are black and brown, many of whom have never been convicted of any crime, are illegally in the city's rogue DNA base. Phil DeSangres, a lawyer in the Special Litigation Unit at Legal Aid, said in a statement, "We simply cannot trust the NYPD to police itself. We look forward to judicial review of these destructive practices to bring our clients the justice they deserve," he said. Sergeant Edward Riley, a spokesman for the New York Police Department, said in a statement that officials will review the suit, adding that they believe the use of DNA helps bring justice. The driving motivation for the NYPD to collect DNA is to legally identify the correct perpetrator, build the strongest case possible for investigators and our partners in various prosecutors' offices, and bring closures to victims and their families, he said. The city's medical examiner's office, which maintains the database, says that it complies with applicable laws and that it's operating with its highest scientific standards set by independent accrediting bodies. The dispute underscores tensions that have erupted in cities across the country over efforts to increase the use of technology and surveillance tactics in policing and comes amid a highly charged local debate over elevated gun violence. In New York, Mayor Eric Adams has called for expanding the use of facial recognition software to identify gun carriers, which he argues could aid in crime fighting. First of all, everybody knows that the facial recognition software is racist. It does not pick up black faces and it misidentifies black faces. So this is so well known. There's a Netflix special.
During my first semester at MIT, I got computer vision software that was supposed to track my face. It didn't work until I put on this white mask. I'm thinking, all right, what's going on here? Is it the lighting conditions? Is it the angle at which I'm looking at the camera, or is there something more? That's when I started looking into issues of bias that can creep into technology.
Our ideas about technology that we think are normal are actually ideas that come from a very small and homogeneous group of people.
Vast amounts of data at incredible speeds.
Everybody has unconscious biases, and people embed their own biases into technology.
This kid got stopped as a result of facial recognition misidentification, and then used that as justification to search you. This is an innocent child.
Racism is becoming mechanized.
Systemic issues are only going to be hardwired into new technologies.
It's not just face classification, it's any data-centric technology.
Every day, we are all being scored.
Who gets hired, who gets housing.
I am making predictions for your life right now.
The people who own the code deploy it on other people, and there is no accountability.
Management at Atlantic Towers wanted to install the facial recognition software. Pretty much turn this place into Fort Knox.
The technology is being rapidly adopted, and there are no safeguards.
We are socially controlled in a way that we don't see.
technology that analyzes faces could be biased, but the company is pushing it anyway.
What demographic is it most effective on?
White men.
Show me that it's going to be fair, that it's legal, before you put it out. That's what we don't have yet.
It's going to take people coming together, driving for justice in this age of automation.
So don't believe for 1 second that Mr. Adams does not know this. So he wants to use facial recognition software when he knows that it's racist and he's black and his kids are black. But civil liberties advocates and privacy groups have contended that the advancements come at the expense of communities of color, infringe on the rights of people who have not been convicted of crimes, and place them at risk of wrongful convictions if errors are made, which there are a lot of. You can change your social security number if you're a victim of identity theft. You can't change your DNA, said Albert Foxconn, the executive director for the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. You're creating this constant threat for months, not for years, but the rest of your life, that you can be targeted by this information. The genetic database has come under fire in recent years for the tactics the police use to collect DNA samples, often without a person's consent, lawyers say. The department's detective guide instructs detectives to offer a water bottle, soda, cigarette, gum, or food to someone being questioned in connection with the crime whose DNA is sought. Pay attention. And to collect the item once they leave. Those practices have invited scrutiny in high-profile cases, like when detectives offered a McDonald's soda to a 12-year-old boy who was facing a felony charge in 2018, took the straw and tested it for DNA. The boy's profile did not match the crime scene evidence, but remains in the system for over a year. New York state law requires a conviction or court order before someone's DNA can be stored in a state-run databank. But the city's database, which contains more than 31,000 profiles and is known as Local DNA Index System, includes DNA from people like Miss Leslie who have been arrested or questioned but not convicted. Those specific demographics of those in the database are unclear, but they most likely reflect arrest patterns in the city, where about 75% of the people arrested over the past decade were black and Latino. And let's not forget stop and frisk, when people were getting stopped and arrested and detained for no reason whatsoever. And now we see why, to get their DNA into the system. Or on top of trying to pin charges on people that they didn't deserve, didn't need, and shouldn't have happened. The suit in New York mirrors one last year in Orange County, California, in which lawyers argued that a database of DNA samples maintained by the district attorney's office ran afoul of state law and violated residents' rights to due process. That county's database, which contains 200,000 DNA profiles, is significantly larger than New York City's, even though its population is much smaller, which means they was doing their due diligence with that stop and frisk, honey. While state and federal DNA databases are subject to legislative oversight, New York City's lacks independent supervision. And then who are you going to get to supervise them? Who wants to supervise a supervisor? And is a supervisor somebody that I trust? Is a supervisor somebody that I trust? No. Which civil liberties groups argue often leads to a failure to address questions over legality, privacy, effectiveness, and data security. Facing criticism, the police department overhauled rules for the database in 2020. It conducted an initial audit and flagged for removal samples that were more than 2 years old and had not been linked in an ongoing investigation. Officials pledged to routinely repeat the process for new profiles, and about 4,000 have been removed since then. Do you believe that? I don't. State legislators have also weighed a bill that would ban New York City and other local governments from operating their own DNA databases. And we got Ms. Holcomb in there. We already seen that Cuomo vetoed the private prison bills. So we already know what she gonna do here. Because she's trying to get private prisons back. Yeah, I talked about that. Howard Baum, a former assistant director at the city's medical examiner's office who helped build the system, has said it's grown far beyond its intended purpose, size, and scope. I know that the NYPD has worked hard to reform its policies, and it seems like everything they have done to reform, they are rolling back underneath Holcomb and this new mayor. I know that the NYPD has worked hard to reform its policies, but as I've stated before, the new policy is half-baked, he wrote in a testimony for city council hearing on the database in 2020. No arrest, no conviction, but the DNA is keeping your DNA, and this is the creator. What possible justification is there for that? The police and the prosecutors say that the database is a crucial tool, and removing it would be damaging. Damaging to who? Because keeping it is damaging. It is violating our rights. But they don't care about that. Ronnie Harrison, the police department's former chief of department, said 2 years ago that the database has led to 5,000 matches since 2015 illegally. He argued that expansive changes to it could lower the number of leads and investigations and create unintended consequences for the innocent. To drop this valuable science would be a grave mistake to anyone invested in transforming our criminal justice system by better ensuring citizens' rights while continuing to keep New Yorkers safe, wrote Mr. Harrison, who is now the police commissioner in Suffolk County. The database has come under particularly heavy scrutiny for including minors, children, that means the babies, from whom the police department said in 2020 they would no longer collect DNA. Do you trust that? I don't. In connection with the misdemeanors, city council members this year are expected to reintroduce a bill that would prohibit the collection of DNA from minors in all cases without a parent's consent. Once again, we are leaving this in the governor's hands, just like Cuomo when he vetoed that bill about private prisons. We can't trust these people to pass bills. And then if they pass the bill, we can't trust them to freaking enforce the bill. But Oleg, a top lawyer for the police department, argued at a council hearing on Friday that the bill would make police work more difficult. What? So you can't do your job unless you do it illegally? Because that doesn't work at my job. If I do illegal stuff at my job, I get arrested. So you can do your job illegally, and that's okay because it makes you better at your job. Sound like you need to get better at your job. And said that people under 18 made up less than 2% of the current database, then take them the hell out. Many experts on DNA evidence say that the vast databases that include large numbers of people who have been only questioned or arrested on minor charges because of the increased likelihood that a crime scene sample will produce a partial match with an innocent person. There's this perception that the bigger the database is, the better for public safety, and that hasn't been borne out, said Brandon L. Garrett, a law professor at Duke University, who has extensively studied the use of DNA evidence. The more innocent people's stuff you have in these databases, the more its crime-fighting ability is harmed. That's y'all's expert.